The Wizard Amalantrah and LAM. The Amalantra working was originally intended for publication in the Equinox Volume 3 No. 2, although this volume was ultimately never produced. The working remained mentioned only within Crowley's magical records and in the Confessions. One of the most enduring visual artifacts associated with these operations is Crowley's drawing of LAM, appearing in 1919 in the Blue Equinox as the frontispiece to The Voice of the Silence by Helena Blavatsky, which included Crowley's commentary. Though the image itself is simple, its symbolic implications have generated extensive interpretation within occult and ufologist groups. The events leading to the Amalantra working occurred while Aleister Crowley was in the United States during the later years of the First World War. The working transpired from January 14th to June 16th of 1918. It was during this period he was working with Roddy Minor, who served in the role of Scarlet Woman. Minor, who was given the magical title Sora Akitha and was sometimes referred to by Crowley as the Camel, had not previously shown any particular interest in ceremonial magic. During a weekend in which she and Crowley were ceremonially smoking opium together, she entered into a visionary state and began describing images that appeared spontaneously in her perception. Among these visions was the striking image of an egg positioned beneath a palm tree. This vision immediately attracted Crowley's attention because it corresponded closely with earlier instructions received in a previous clairvoyant operation known as the Abulda's working, performed with Crowley's previous Scarlet Woman, Sora Veracum. In that communication, an intelligence indicated that Crowley should seek a vision involving an egg, suggesting that the symbol held an important key within his magical work. When Minor independently reported seeing such an image, Crowley regarded it as confirmation that the communication process may have resumed transmission under new conditions. Minor reported that an intelligence she referred to as the Wizard wished to communicate with Crowley directly. In order to test the authenticity of this intelligence, Crowley posed a question involving the correct Hebrew spelling of Baphomet. The answer provided through Minor produced the Kabbalistic value of 729. This number carried considerable symbolic weight. It is the cube of 9 and was associated by Crowley with the cubic stone, a symbol connected with initiation and with the mysteries of the Knights Templar. Within Crowley's interpretation, it also resonated with aspects of Mithraic symbolism and the hidden esoteric significance attached to the name Baphomet itself. When Crowley asked the intelligence to provide its own name, the response given was Amalantra. When analyzed to gematria, this name also produced the number 729, reinforcing the impression that the entity possessed knowledge of the Kabbalistic system being used within the working. At a later point, the Wizard also supplied the Kabbalistic value of Therion, Crowley's own magical name, which was subsequently confirmed in correspondence from Samuel Iwaz Jacobs. These numerical correspondences strengthened Crowley's belief that the communication involved a coherent intelligence operating within the symbolic framework of ceremonial magic. Within the Amalantra working itself, one of the recurring affirmations recorded was the phrase, "It's all in the egg." The egg functioned not merely as an isolated vision, but as a central symbolic key. In one description, the egg appears resting within a lotus, a clear allusion to the Egyptian child god Harpocrates. This figure represents the silent and hidden form of Horus, known in Thelemic terminology as Hor-Par-Krat, the babe in the egg. Harpocrates embodies potentiality, secrecy, and the latent power concealed within silence. When Crowley pressed the intelligence further regarding the meaning of the egg, Amalantra responded with the enigmatic instruction, "Thou art to go this way." The emphasis on the way forms a thematic bridge to Crowley's later association of the entity LAM with the concept of the path or method of spiritual realization. In 1919, Crowley exhibited a number of paintings in what he called the Dead Souls exhibition. Among these works was a drawing titled The Way. This was the image reproduced in the Blue Equinox. Beneath the illustration, Crowley wrote that LAM was the Tibetan word for way or path, while Lama meant he who goeth. Crowley connected this idea with Egyptian religious titles referring to the god who treads the path, as well as with Buddhist spiritual terminology describing the progression toward enlightenment. He also noted that the numerical value of LAM is 71, the number of the book in which the image appeared. The association between LAM and the concept of the path may also resonate with a passage in chapter 2, verse 49 of the Book of the Law, in which the text speaks of a babe and an egg. Harpocrates represents the inward turning of consciousness and the preservation of sacred knowledge within the initiate. The egg in this context symbolizes the sealed vessel of potential existence, awaiting the moment of manifestation. At the bottom of Crowley's painting of LAM, there also appears a stylized number 49. One intriguing parallel occurs in Fragment 1, verse 49 of The Voice of the Silence, which reads, "Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself." In his commentary, Crowley compares this idea to a scene in the opera Parsifal, in which the landscape moves toward the night, rather than the night traveling toward the landscape. The symbolism suggests that spiritual progress involves a transformation of the practitioner, rather than movement through an external environment. Crowley also remarked that the verse implies the doctrine of the Tao, indicating that only one who understands Taoist philosophy could fully grasp its meaning. Crowley's engagement with Taoist philosophy was particularly intense during his period of magical retirement on Aesopus Island. There he worked extensively on a commentary on the Tao Te Ching, based on the translation by James Legge. During this period, Crowley recorded that he remained in frequent contact with Amalantra through visionary and magical means. The Taoist concept of the way as an ineffable underlying principle of reality may have influenced Crowley's interpretation of LAM as a symbolic representation of the path. In this sense, LAM could be understood not simply as an individual intelligence, but as a manifestation of the principle of the way itself. Several eminent occult writers developed these ideas further. Kenneth Grant wrote extensively about LAM in his Typhonian trilogies and claimed, Aleister Crowley regarded the entity as another mirror of I Was, the intelligence responsible for the reception of the Book of the Law. He suggested that LAM represented a gateway through which non-human intelligences could enter human awareness. Grant set about establishing a cult of LAM and wrote extensively on LAM in the Typhonian trilogies. He created a method of meditation focused on creating a gateway for LAM to emerge. Other occultists also explored this current. Michael Bertiaux tapped into the current of LAM in the magical systems of the Monastery of the Seven Rays and La Couleuvre Noire, interpreting the figure within an intricate synthesis of Thelemic and Voodoo Gnostic traditions. After participating in the Amalantra working, Charles Stansfield Jones, known as Frater Achad, was moved to declare the commencement of the Aeon of Mot, which he characterized as an Aeon of Silence. Is LAM and Amalantra the same entity? Whether these names refer to the same intelligence or to distinct but related entities remains uncertain. Crowley provides no definitive answer. It's interesting to note in Crowley's painting of LAM another less perceptible set of large dark eyes corresponding to the more traditional depiction of gray aliens. In the 20th century, the image of the gray alien became widely recognizable through the cover illustration of Communion by Whitley Strieber. The resemblance between that depiction and Crowley's drawing of LAM illustrates that Crowley may have been among the earliest modern individuals to portray such a form. Crowley's terminology is revealing. He used the word praeter-human in his description of LAM deliberately to indicate something beyond human, but neither angelic nor demonic in any traditional sense. He avoided placing LAM within any particular context and believed he belonged to a separate order of being. This description resonates with later theories concerning ultraterrestrial intelligences, a concept developed by theorists such as John Keel and Jacques Vallee. The ultraterrestrial closely parallels modes of non-human intelligence, subtly influencing humanity from behind the scenes, shaping belief systems and directing evolution through subtle methods. Within this framework, ultraterrestrials are not necessarily visitors from distant planets, but inhabitants of adjacent layers of reality that intersect with human perception under certain conditions. Crowley's magical worldview was similarly structured around the idea that reality consists of multiple interpenetrating levels, accessible through altered states of consciousness. The Amalantra working may therefore be interpreted not as an attempt to summon an entity across physical space, but as a deliberate effort to adjust perception so that communication with such intelligences is possible. Within this perspective, LAM was not an entity which manifested from deep space, but an intelligence already present within the deeper strata of reality, revealed only when the appropriate methods and conditions open the gateways.